Namaste. Welcome to my podcast. All right. Today we touch upon something slightly different from what I have been covering. I've always made an attempt to try and bring people who have unique perspectives to offer. Now, it does not matter whether I agree with them or not. My aim via this podcast has been opening an avenue for sensible long form discussions and conversations. And today's podcast is also such an attempt. If you are an urban animal and if you live a life that is full of stress, uh, you always try to look for solutions to that. And it's a constant struggle. And now, how do we deal with this stress, whether it's at the commercial level or it is at the personal level, or maybe let's just go beyond that. We always hear we need to find answers to our problems in ways and methods that are rooted in our cultural context, but actually that's easier said than done. The first question one should ask is, how does one go about doing that? Because the problem one has when one touches upon these issues is there's a lot of confusion, because on one side there are genuine solutions to problems that can be found within our cultural context, and sometimes under the garb of that, a lot of mumbo jumbo is also peddled. Anyways, enough of this. So let us get on with the podcast. My guest today is Raghu Ananthanarayanan. So Raghu, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Kushal. Thanks for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. So Raghu, before we start the podcast and we get into the specifics, why don't you tell a bit about yourself to the listeners?
Okay. By training, I'm an engineer, and by my vocation, I am what you call a process worker. And between the two of these, there's a 10, 12 year stint, 12 years or more of study with Krishnamacharya, Yogacharya Krishnamacharya, and his son Deshikachar. And I think this period of study with Krishnamacharya and Deshikachar has been the most important part of my background so far. So the work that I do is actually engaging with people in depth, running what are called encounter groups or laboratory learning contexts, where we have small groups of people who come together for a week, sometimes a little longer, and share of their own lives and what is happening to themselves very deeply. And the group then enables people to look at themselves, understand what the roots of their behavior is, what are their inner conditioning, and so on. And through the week, people are able to touch very deep aspects of themselves, renew themselves, heal themselves, and so on. And this basic kind of work I then apply to many contexts. I also work with organizations in leadership development, where I bring in many of these ideas, but in a little more structured format.
Okay, now I was, while I was doing my research, I actually, went to your website. By the way, guys, I'm going to leave a link to the website of Raghu. So you guys can also, I will highly recommend, you should go there and check it out. You can go through, he has written books and he has information about his coaching and different things. So now, obviously, I actually was kind of confused of how do I structure this podcast. So, like, let's say if somebody goes to your website, right? So the first thing you say on your website is, discovering the self through the Mahabharata, right? Now, I wanted you to touch upon that because I mean, personal bias towards Mahabharata as an Indian. I mean,
Yeah.
so I wanted you to explain that. So when you say discovery of self through the Mahabharata, now what kind of aspects do you cover in this? There must be obviously at the personal level, and do you use the same thing at the organizational level? Let's say like I'm an entrepreneur, so let's say if I come to you and I say would you organize a program for a set of employees in my organization? So do you do both? And if you do, would you? I mean, I would want you to explain both of them then.
Okay. Yes, I do work with both. And like I was saying, the deeper work happens in what are called laboratory learning settings. And what happens in organizations is what we generally refer to as workshops. And workshops are a lot more structured. What I've been working on with the Mahabharata is to use the Mahabharata as a mirror to ourselves. Let me explain. Um, in a typical immersion program, we spend a day or more, about 2 days almost, helping people to look at their own feelings, get in touch with their own feelings, and get in touch with what we call archetypal personas. Now, getting in touch with one's own feelings is not as simple as it seems, because most of us build fairly strong defense mechanisms around our feelings. Yeah, through life, we get hurt, there are disappointments, and so on. So we tend to develop fairly strong and often viable defense mechanisms that help us live in a certain way within our context. Unfortunately, these defense mechanisms become very entrenched, and they lock us up into being functional in certain forms of engagement in certain contexts, but they also make us dysfunctional in other contexts, and therefore, in a sense, reduce our potential, reduce our versatility, and so on. So, the first step in the work is to help people get in touch with their feelings and see how to watch one's own feelings from a quiet place inside. So we use a fair amount of dance, ideas taken from Indian dance, because Indian dance bases itself on the Navarasas. So we've borrowed some ways in which people work with this, and through the day enable people to experience a rasa which is referred to as shantam. Now, shantam is quite often translated as peace, whereas shantam is really a quietness which is replete with possibilities. So it's a fullness really, and a stillness that is full would probably be a better translation of shantam than the usual understanding of peace. Now, usually people are able to get in touch with this, and then from this space of shantam, one can start looking at how I have constructed myself. For example, some people have a very strong affinity to what we call the guardian inside. Okay, so that part of me which is defensive, which is looking for opportunities, which is very vigilant, and so on. Some other people develop a very strong internal judge, and that then seems to be a very important part of their interface with the world. Other people get caught with escapist tendencies. Some people get caught with a victim inside and become a little closed and very careful and cautious, and so on. And these are broadly personas that everybody has inside them, and they play out in different combinations and in different ways. So the next stage of the work is actually to enable people to get in touch with these personas inside, to discover how much of space I'm giving to each of them. How do these personas influence my behavior, and so on. And these personas not only influence behavior, they also have an impact on one's body. So, for example, if a person invests a lot in their guardian, they usually end up with a very tight muscle tone, uh, very hypersensitive and reactive, and so on. So these are not just in the mind in a sense, because the yogic system does not look at anything as a separate mind and a body. So whatever is happening in my thoughts, in a sense, is also happening in my body and my emotions and so on. So we enable people to be able to get in touch with this and see this. Right now, once a person has have some facility with this, it then becomes easy to mirror oneself of the heroic figures and the hero archetypes that one finds in the Mahabharata. So at the third stage, we get people to look at what their favorite characters are, enact them. And so typically we have a group of about 20 people, and different people choose to look in depth into one or the other character. Like, for example, quite often Draupadi is a favorite of people. Arjuna, obviously, Karna, and then various other characters come up. Like sometimes people have actually examined Shakuni, and so on. So through reflecting of these characters, through enactments, people start getting in touch with how they themselves behave in various contexts. And the Mahabharata is very, very rich because it offers several contexts in which behaviors can be reflected of. And this then enables them to really see where they're coming from, what their dharma sankatas are, what their dilemmas are, and so on. So once the enactment is over and we start reflecting, the enactment kind of goes into the background. It's not the main thing anymore, because I'm in touch with how I behave like Bhishma, or how I behave like Karna, or how I behave like Arjuna, or whatever, whichever character one is looking at. And this then becomes a very powerful way of understanding behavior. I use the same thing in organizations without going into this kind of depth, but we follow a similar process.
All right, I had a question for you over here. So here's my question. Now, I find this very fascinating how you are using different characters in the Mahabharata to, kind of get different aspects of one's personality out. In fact, even while I was going through your website, it really, kind of. Excited me, so I'm literally reading the line on your webpage where there is something written as, are you an Arjuna in a Yudhishthira organization, are your Bhima employees holding your Nakula organization to ransom? So obviously, and where you use different archetypes. So now here's my question. Now obviously this is in the 21st century we have a lot of Freudian or Jungian archetypes too in the picture. Now when you have such a constant hammering or assault, or or input from Western psychoanalyses and stuff like that. And then on the other side, you have the new field of evolutionary psychology coming, where literally human behavior has been studied from, how we have evolved as a species from that point of view. Now, how would you, as a person who looks at the Mahabharata and tries to create these archetypes using different characters of the Mahabharata, so do you see a role of those fields too?
See, the Jungian way of looking at things comes fairly close to what one is talking about. And interestingly, in the last Mahabharata immersion that we finished a couple of weeks back, one of the participants was a fairly well-known scholar in Jungian psychology who had come down all the way from Israel. And it was very interesting because she was very appreciative of the work we are doing. And, she's gone back saying we need to collaborate a lot more. Jungian psychology has a fairly, similar idea about how the self is formed. It also talks about collective unconscious and so on, mythologies and stories. Freudian analysis doesn't sit all that well with what we're doing. But having said that, what one is doing actually in the immersion process is simply helping people view themselves from a more and more subtle place inside of them. That is what is recommended in the Yoga Sutra. Now, when there's actually a sutra that says dhyana heyaha tadvrittaya, which means that when I'm able to watch myself from a place of dhyana, then the roots of my behavior start changing. I clarify, the seeds of negative behavior just get burnt away. That is what we're attempting to do in the immersion process, right? And when you watch the processes inside and start describing them, I guess it would have similarities with any field which is actually just describing the phenomenon as they are happening and not interpreting the phenomenon. So in yoga, we don't interpret it using some other theoretical idea. We try and watch processes as subtly as possible as and when they're happening. And this watching has tremendous energy. And actually, breakthroughs happen when I'm able to watch from this quietness inside. So that is what I'm trying to work with. And similarities with the Jungian is only because they also talk about archetypes. They talk about similar archetypes. And Jung has had a long and a very ambivalent relationship with India. He has used a lot of ideas from the Yoga Sutra. He has actually written a commentary on Patanjali and so on. He has talked a lot about mandalas. And we use a lot of drawing in our work to help people get in touch with inner processes. So there is some similarity, but there are a lot of differences also.
Now, this has nothing to do with what you're doing, but it's just popped into my head, so I'm going to ask this question. Have you guys come up with a kind of a questionnaire setup also, where I'll give you an example. There's something very interesting online. I'm sure people nowadays, Jordan Peterson is very famous. He's a I think he's a professor in the University of Toronto, and he's someone who works a lot under the Jungian archetypes. Now, he has something called the self-authoring program online, where basically I was so fascinated that I actually paid for it, and I went and tried to understand it by taking it for myself. Now, what he does basically is, he has a standard set of questions where you can, go on answering these questions to phase by phase, and they have put it out in a very systematized manner. I found it interesting. I'm not going to say whether it was helpful or not, because that has nothing to do with this conversation. But I was curious to know whether you guys have some sort of a method where, you guys have come up with a, detailed questionnaire where, I can do this, at the comfort of my home, and I can actually go through that.
Yes, we we have developed a questionnaire which we call the Pandava profile, where you basically answer an adjective. We call it an adjective checklist. We have 16 adjectives. You put it in an order, and our questionnaire is very interesting because we ask you to do three things. We ask you to look at how I look at myself now. Then we say, what do you think is your ideal self? And then we also ask you to rank order the adjectives based on what you think is the average person whom you're dealing with, what we call the other people, the person in your mind that you're carrying. So this gives us a very in-depth way of looking at a person's inner behavioral profile. We don't believe that anybody is exclusively a Bhima or a Yudhishthira or any of these five, right? All of us have elements of all of these five. We favor one over the other, and so on. And so this actually captures what we call the Pandava profile. And because we are looking at 5 types of behaviors with various intensities, you can actually map millions of types of profiles on this. Yeah, mathematically, it's factorial 5, factorial 4 of whatever it is. Yeah, it's a huge number. So we do have that, and we use that quite a bit when we work with organizations. And it becomes extremely important and interesting in leadership context. Let me just illustrate something here. See, very often there is an idea in people's minds that a Rambo or a extended Bhima type of behavior is something very valuable in organizations, whereas you actually need all 5 behaviors depending on the context. Yeah, that's the line that you read out. So let's say my propensities are very strongly a Nakula type. The first thing we do is to help you recognize it and say, this is your Swadharma, this is your intrinsic capability, can you value it? Now, the sad part is that in India, we've lost the ability to value ourselves the way we are based on our own thinking and our own frameworks. So quite often, we run to some other comparison. It's a tremendous thing to see how relieved people are when they say, yeah, you've captured who I am, and yes, I can respect it. Right? Now, once that has happened, I know what my areas are where I can really excel. I know which are the areas in which I need help. I know which are the areas I need development. So, for example, if I understand this very well, and I'm in a context which requires, let's say I'm a Nakula, I'm in a context which requires a Bhima kind of behavior. Now, the propensity of Nakula is to be supportive, create infrastructures for action, be inclusive, and so on. And Bhima is much more of an aggressive warrior type. So if I have those abilities in me, I can develop them, I can nurture them. If I don't, I allow somebody else in my team, encourage them to bring out these behaviors. Now, having this insight is tremendously useful, because if I don't respect all 5 types of behavior, I cannot create a team where I respect other people whose behaviors are different from mine. I don't know how to complement myself, and so on. So this kind of profiling becomes extremely useful in an organization context. And we find that entrepreneurs especially benefit a lot from understanding this, as do any person in a leadership space.
Okay, now one more question that has popped into my head. The listeners will have to bear with me. I have a weird style of podcasting where sometimes, I don't like to prepare a lot of questions for my guests because I feel it becomes very fake. So I genuinely try to absorb what my guest is saying on the spot, and then whatever comes into my head, I ask them. So if you find some questions boring, well, too bad. So here's my question, Raghu. Now, this is what I observe as an entrepreneur, or as just a fellow human being. When you interact with other people, especially in upper middle class or urban setups, what has happened is I see a lot of confused people. Uh, you know, you, in our lives, we try to relate to some character or the other, or we try to find what is the essence of, let's say, we are on the subject of Mahabharata. So for me personally, Karna has always been a very interesting and a very inspirational character in my personal life, but I took inspiration from there. What I see nowadays with a lot of 20 or something young kids, they get their inspiration is confused, and their inspiration comes from a source that is actually alien to us, which is the Western source. Now, I have nothing against that source. I mean, I use a lot of things Western, and I consume a lot of Western material on that. But what I observe is when the source itself is from outside, which is devoid of your cultural context, it creates a lot of cognitive dissonance. Now, in your field of work, I mean, this is what you do now. So, how much of this is a problem? This cognitive dissonance that exists amongst people that you deal with, and how do you get over it?
There are 2 things, Kushal. One is, see, we don't always talk about, Yudhishthira or whatever. When we go into an organizational space, we are talking about 5 types of power. And we talk about the warrior type, the healer type, and so on, so that they're a little more generic. We do introduce the idea of Bhima and Nakula and all that. And I've worked quite a bit with people who are not Indians. And I find that, for example, we had a group once where there were 2 people from China. The ease with which they were responding to the Nakula type, or the, using words like Nakula type behavior or Bhima type behavior, was very, very interesting. I think there is some strange resistance in some Indians to use what is Indian. Okay. Now, having said that, I find that younger people, once they understand the inner drama that's going on, are able to relate to these things quite easily, because the persona types that I told you, the archetypal personas like victim and the judge and all that, exist in everybody. Whoever, wherever you come from in the world, these are broad archetypes that exist. And it is simply that the Indian theater and Indian dance has codified them very nicely. So it's a very beautiful way of working with them, right? And third thing that I find is that young people are not all that out of touch with our own stuff. Yeah. And if you introduce it to them nicely, they do pick it up. I haven't seen too many people having a problem. And also, the other question that you bring up about cognitive dissonance is something that worries us, because I don't know if you've read this author called Frantz Fanon, who's written a very, very powerful book called Black Face and White Mask. Sorry. The name of the book is Black Face, White Mask. Now, he talked about what was happening to the psyche of people in Africa, Northern Africa. He was a psychoanalyst. How people try to cover up who they intrinsically are because they wish to be someone else. Right? Now, this is where our concern is, because unless I can respect who I am, I cannot base myself on something strong and powerful. And there is so much in the Indian psyche that is very powerful. We have an ability to deal with ambiguity, which is very, very powerful. We have an ability to deal with complexity. We are very accommodating. We assimilate things very well. So there's lots of things about us that we need to appreciate and value. There is an issue where more and more there seems to be some idea that one has to conform to a Western model of behavior. Now, the strange thing is, if you look at recent work in the West, last 4-5 years, many of them are appreciating the Indian. For example, one of the movements now is whether people can appreciate the feminine in themselves. Now, Arjuna is a hero who actually understands his own femininity very deeply. Yeah. There's also a lot of emphasis in the West right now, last 5-10 years, about people being able to understand dilemmas and paradoxes and polarities. Now, the Indian idea of leadership has always been that a leader is someone who understands the Dharma Sankata and deals with Dharma Sankata. And that's why, Dharmaputra or Yudhishthira is a key character or a leader type of character, even among the 5, because he's grappling with Dharma Sankata all the time. Arjuna is a master at dealing with Dharma Sankata. If you go into older models of other Indian models like Vikramaditya, Vikramaditya stories are full of double binds and Dharma Sankatas that he has to solve. This is another idea that's coming back very strongly, because in a complex and uncertain world, you have to deal with paradoxes, you have to deal with polarities, you have to deal with ambiguity. And the Indian heroic type is one who appreciates all of this, and also the Indian hero type respects his femininity. So I'm hoping that people recognize that we have a wealth out here which we don't have to discard in any way or disrespect. We can actually use it because it's such a powerful resource. And one of the things that, Dharampalji, one of my mentors, would say, and this is one of the things that influenced me greatly, was he says, you can't be a great nation by running behind the tails of somebody else. And you can't lobotomize your brain or lobotomize your mind and replace it with something else. You have to start with what you have. You have to respect it, value it, and build on it. And we have a lot to be respectful of, that we have a lot to value and to build on.
I couldn't agree more with you. In fact, what bothers me when I nowadays interact with a lot of college kids is, they're losing one of the biggest strengths that an average Indian has always had. Indians in general don't have an inherent discomfort with diversity. And this is my one experience of staying in the West. While the West, the left in the West has a great fetish with diversity, but beyond that fetish, if you poke and prod and you actually go down at a deeper level in the West, I think the biggest problem in the West is this, this keenness to homogenize, and it stems from this discomfort of diversity in the West. And sometimes I get worried that, Indians, in their quest of aping everything Western, again, this is not to beat down on the West. I'm something who likes the West. I don't dislike them, but I think we should take what we can get from them rather than what they want us to get from them. And that's not the discussion of this podcast, but it's just something that came to my head. Now I wanted to talk to you about another book of yours, which was Learning Through Yoga. Now, could you tell the listeners a bit about that? Because there's a lot of pictorial representation in that book. So, could you tell us a bit about that too now?
That's very interesting. I wrote this book when I was still studying with Deshikachar. And one of the things that bothered us was that yoga, even at that time, I'm talking about late 80s or middle 80s, yeah, was slowly becoming only asana practice. And the question was, how do I introduce yoga in its holistic frame to young people and beginners? And so the book is actually written for a young person, and it looks at three aspects fundamentally of yoga. Of course, the asana and pranayama is an important part, so we devote one section of every chapter to asana and pranayama. Enquiry, self-enquiry especially, is an extremely important part of yoga. So the second part of each chapter is questions that we have raised. And what we did was we went through the Yoga Sutra and found that if you look at the Yoga Sutra carefully, it's actually asking a question. And it's not making a unilateral statement. So we went, a little into depth and said, can we restate the Yoga Sutra in terms of a question? So that's the second part of every chapter. And the third part is that in the Indian context, you don't answer a question with a direct answer. Like, for example, I don't know how many people know this, but a lot of the Aesop's fables, for instance, were actually, Jataka tales or Panchatantra tales or whatever, which have gone to the West, but which end up with a moral at the end of the story. Now, Zen stories and Sufi stories and Upanishadic stories and so on relate the story to you, and they hope to evoke something inside you, which is your own wisdom. And very often, if you listen carefully to these stories, they're extremely beautiful and they stay in your mind and you keep going back to them over and over again. So that's what we've done in the third part of the book. We've related stories which are connected to the questions we have asked, but don't answer them in a direct one-on-one kind of a thing. It doesn't say, this is your question, this is your answer. It's like, this is your question. Can you ponder more about this question? using this story as a reflector. So it was, one of the ideas we wrote it for was to say, can we write it for children? And then it became a beginner's book. So that's why it's called Learning Through Yoga. And we believe that yoga is it's a very strong preparatory thing that one has to go through. And once you've learned some of the techniques of yoga, which is quietening the body, quietening the mind, quietening your emotions, I then become capable of being the best that I can be. So I can then apply this capability in any field I want to. And in fact, if you look at any book, now if you look at a Vastu Shastra, the introductory part of the Vastu Shastra will say, if you have to become a great Stapati, you have to be a yogi. Yeah, Chanakya has written about how a king or a leader has to be a yogi. Bharata Shastra starts with saying, be a yogi, and so on. So the understanding of yoga is fundamentally to quieten the emotions, to have an ability to think clearly, to see things clearly, and then you apply it in different fields. So that's what we wrote the book for, which actually is for a beginner's mind in a sense. And I'm glad you like it.
No, I actually found it very interesting because, like I said, the biggest problem these days we have is that when anybody talks about yoga, we are pretty much stuck with the asana. While if somebody is into neuroscience or any kind of subject, actually Eastern philosophy can give a lot of input in those fields, and well, not just Hindu philosophy. You can talk about Buddhist philosophy, or even some aspects of Jain philosophy, and there is a lot to be offered there. But what I see is that when this comes from the West, it is somehow accepted, and when somebody of our own skin color or of our own ethnicity says that, people don't take it seriously. And sometimes, I feel it is kind of justified, because there are a lot of charlatans out there, who use a lot of mumbo jumbo. Now, how does one actually identify what is mumbo jumbo and what is serious stuff? And I'm asking you this because you are obviously someone who's deeply immersed in this for more than 2 decades. So now, how you can call it the bullshit detector. Now, how does one go about detecting bullshit?
Okay. By the way, I've been in this for about 4 decades, yeah, from the 80s. No, it's from the 70s, mid 70s. I've been on this journey. It's a long time now. I find it a little difficult to answer your question because I guess it is also, like they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If I, as a person, take something seriously, sooner or later I will gravitate towards the really good stuff. Yeah, and I think there is both things happening, Kushal. At one level, you have absolutely ridiculous things like beer yoga that's being talked about, which is a travesty of yoga. You also have people like Francisco Varela and many people like this, neuroscientists, who have delved very deeply into the Eastern. And in fact, almost every shift in psychology theory in the West has happened because a critical understanding of the East has happened. Whether you take Gestalt philosophy or even the latest stuff that's going on right now, uses a lot of Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist practices called dialectical behavioral therapy. The good thing is nowadays, dialectical behavioral therapy refers directly to Buddhist stuff. So that's a great improvement over what's been happening over the last few decades, where they have taken usually the first person who takes, like Jung has written extensively about Indian stuff, but other people who refer to Jung would not talk about the fact that Jung has relied on Buddhist or Chinese or Indian texts for this. This, I think, is changing. So I think there is a context that is coming up where there are people who are serious people who are delving into the mind, who understand the depth of yoga. In fact, there's a very interesting book that I read recently called The Body Keeps the Score, in which the author refers to about 6 or 7 types of therapy. About 4 of them are directly linked to yoga, or yoga practices derived from yoga. So this is a very interesting trend that is happening, and I'm sure people will in India will also start to understand why it is important. I think it's just a question of time. Yeah, I think more and more people are turning back and saying we have something interesting here, let's look at it. So I'm not so pessimistic.
Well, actually, it's nice to hear that you're not that pessimistic because, when it comes to me, I've lost hope of mankind a long time back. But, anyways, so now obviously I can't end this podcast without asking asking this question. So let's say I have listened to this podcast. Now I may not be an organization, but I'm interested. Now what is the best way to contact you, Raghu?
Okay, thanks for asking me this. There are 2 ways in which you can get in touch with me. There's an organization called Ritambhara, spelt Ritambhara. That's the organization through which I'm doing most of my work right now, the immersions and so on. Our website is www.ritambhara.org.in. So our ongoing programs are obviously published out there. The next one that's coming up is actually a very interesting program. I'm excited about it. We are examining the idea of love. We're calling it Shringara Rasanubhava. And we kind of, it comes out of some concern because the young people of today are confused about the meaning of love. Like you were saying, there are a lot of Western influences and so on. There's some funny idea that in India we didn't have romantic love, and there's a very strange kind of discourse going on there. And if you look at many of our dance, the dances that we've evolved, a lot of our music, various shades and nuances of love have been explored very, very beautifully. So that's the next program we are doing called Shringara Rasanubhava. I'd be very excited to have young people come over and explore this with us. And the other way is obviously to write to me, which is raghu.tao at gmail.com, and I will respond, obviously.
All right, guys, I'm going to leave a specific link for all these websites and Raghu's email address and wherever you can find him on social media in the description of the podcast. I would really recommend all of you to get in touch with him. You guys are all a bunch of at least smart people listen to my podcast, because to listen to a 45-minute conversation you need patience. So if you have patience, there is hope, and if there is hope, then you should definitely take the next step and go and check out the stuff Raghu has to offer. So Raghu, once again, thanks a lot for doing this. I really had a good time, and I hope to have many more such conversations with you in the future.
Thanks a lot, Kushal. I was quite amazed with the way you handled the questions, because I really think you listened well and it challenged me a lot. So thanks a lot. I'd love to have more conversations with you.
Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.
Bye.